Yep. Okay, so let's get started. I was sort of under the assumption, being a lunchtime session, that you guys would all have lunch, but you've obviously eaten lunch, and it seemed a bit odd to me that lunch was at 20 past 1, which is obviously true because you couldn't wait that long. You've all had your lunch. Everything's good. So what we're going to do in this session is spend most of the time showing you BizTalk Server, right? This session is a demo of BizTalk Server. We're assuming it's actually the ASI 301. 301 sort of means it's a 300 level session, which is a mistake. It's not a 300 level session. It's sort of a 200 level session. The expectation is that you're coming to this to learn a little bit about what BizTalk is, what it can do, you know, and actually see it in action. Of course, one of the big challenges with seeing BizTalk in action, as I'll talk about, is it's hard to see it in action. It sort of runs under the covers. So we've had to build an app really that shows it in action. I'll cover what tee up what that scenario is. So with that in mind, are you all here to see BizTalk either for the first time, or are you just coming to see a new fancy demo of BizTalk? Is it hands up if it's never seen BizTalk before, coming to see it for the first time? Maybe about half. Hands up, coming to see what it can do, blah, blah, blah. Okay, about 50-50. So that's pretty good. There'll be a bit of something in this session for all of you. There is another BizTalk session tomorrow that I'm delivering with Paolo Salvatore, and that session is a little bit of everything, just to tee it up for you. It's a little bit about what is BizTalk, sort of part of this audience today. What's new, we just shipped BizTalk Server 2010 last month, and so there's a piece in there, section in there, if you just want to come and learn about what the new thing is. And then a big part of that session tomorrow is about sort of the future direction strategy, right? So it's sort of split in those three parts. So what we're going to cover very quickly, I'm Tony Meleg, and this is John Fancy.
Hi.
John's going to be doing the demo, and hopefully you should be able to have a good time without your lunch. So, quick refresher, what does BizTalk Server do? Now, I have this very simple model in my mind around pretty much every single application that you guys are probably likely to build, right? When I say every application, I mean sort of a business app, right? A business app that sits in a customer, large or small, that does something. Most apps that we build today, they look like this, right? What is that a picture of? It's some, client that talks to a web server which talks to a database, right? The vast majority of the apps that we build today look like that. And if you've done your work a little bit better than normal, you might have, a middle tier in your app, right? Where it's service orientated. You can scale that middle tier in a better way, although you still have usually some bottleneck around the database. But that's sort of the heart of the app, right? I call it the transactional piece. That might be taking orders, right? It might be, fulfilling shipments. Whatever it happens to be, that's the core heart of my app, right? And now, of course, what happens is there's processes then that you build around the app that do things on that data that you've captured, do things on the transaction, right? Sometimes you write lines of code to do this. You put those codes in some scheduled process, some batch process. You write some GUI, some plumbing to kick that piece of code off, and off it goes and does something. So it's a process that you might write, or you use other things like BizTalk Server or other sort of workflow products to do similar things. So we're going to talk about processes. Here's an example of a process. Change a shipping address, right? My process has to, retrieve some changes. It has to go and talk to, some other systems. In this case, we're changing a shipping address. Well, there might be things that I've already sent to some supplier, and I need en route to change that shipping address. I have to talk to that external system. I have to send data up to my CRM system. I have to send data or get data from my ERP system because there's a purchase order in place here with some old stale shipping information that I need to change, and send some status back, et cetera, et cetera. That's an example of a process that you might build. Now, the third piece of this jigsaw is about reporting, right? And so, you build these processes on top of your transactions, but you need to understand what's going on. Not just in your transactions, right? How many orders have I got? But in your processes too. What's happening across that complex, supply chain or whatever your processes might be? What's happening, right? What's stuck? What's not stuck? How are things flowing through that system? So reporting is sucking data from both those two pieces and providing, BI and analytics and so on top of that thing. So this model is, a simple model that describes the three big parts of most apps that you build. And when we think about what BizTalk Server does, it primarily is focused on those process parts, right? And the process reporting part too, right? Because part of running a process requires you to move data and move information into the reporting engine, into the analytics infrastructure. So, it drives this process. It solves integration challenges between all the different systems that you need to talk to. Right? How do you talk to this system in this way, this system in this way? I have to, transform data and messages and communicate over different protocols, a whole range of different options to go and talk to systems, right? So it's, it's primarily focused around that. Automating these processes, of course, which is part of the core engine work, and just making it very simple and easy to build and keep these processes running. There's a lot of people, when you're building apps today, who write code to create those processes. And not only do they write code, they have to write a whole pile of infrastructure around that code to keep those processes running, to work out if they're running, to recover from failures when they fail, to scale, to do more complex things. They build a lot of infrastructure around those processes. And part of what BizTalk's role is to essentially help you with that, or really prevent you from having to even write that infrastructure in the first place, right? BizTalk is infrastructure for your processes. Don't write what you can buy, right? That's the basic value prop. And of course, the reporting pieces I just mentioned to capture and analyze the data from those processes. Right, so how does it work? This is sort of for those people who know how it works. This is for the new guys on the block. Very simply, I'm just going to go through this at 1,000 miles an hour. We get data in from somewhere, right? From one of those systems. In this case, we have, an invoice. But the invoice is represented in one system with, just a flat file. In another system, it's a message, right? It could be, it could be a mail message. It could be just a SOAP message, some message sort of system. The way BizTalk handles this is how BizTalk receives these messages is through a receive port and receive locations, right? So you line these up based on who you're talking to. In this first example, the way I'm communicating with that system is through FTP, right? And so I hook up the FTP adapter, right? That's a way to talk to that particular system. In the other case, we have another receive location for receiving these messages. In that case, we're just using, standard SOAP, standard HTTP. So we hook up that adapter. In both cases, the message goes through a pipeline and ends up being converted into a piece of XML. So whatever it's talking to, you get the message through the pipeline. You might have to unravel the message. You might have to take off some security credentials or envelope, a whole pile of things that you can do in this pipeline, and you can, create and put your own code in the pipeline to determine what to do with that particular message or format. It ends up being XML. What do I do with the XML? Well, I might have to map it. I might have to map it from one schema to another schema, right? Because the invoice from customer A and customer B might look different, and they might look different to the invoice that I need to represent in my system. So I need to map that thing. When I map it, after I map it, I've got to store it. I've got to persist that. I don't ever want to lose that message, right? So BizTalk has this thing called the message box. That's sort of the core message engine of the infrastructure that you do not have to write yourself. You use BizTalk's. Now, the exact opposite happens on the way out, right? So even if I don't do anything with this message other than transform it, I might want to send it off to some other system. I do exactly the same thing, but in reverse, right? So I can choose to map it back to some other format. I can choose to then send this message up through the pipeline. Off it goes up through the pipeline. It gets converted from XML into the real thing, and out it goes the door, right, wherever I'm connecting to. So exactly the opposite. Now, what happens is there's another path, which of course is in most business processes, you actually need to build an app that operates over that message that you get in, right? This is where you would normally write a whole pile of code. In BizTalk's world, we don't write code, we draw pictures and lines, right? It's called an orchestration. It's sort of a workflow engine, right? That's how I build my business process. I decide what to do, where I'm going to send it, what decisions I need to make. So that's the core heart of a lot of BizTalk applications, you know, mapped around this engine. Now, and then, you know, I can take my piece of XML, transform it, do whatever things I need to do, and send it out the door. Now, BizTalk, in addition to those core pieces, there's a whole pile of other stuff that do specific things around integration, right? So here are the sort of core other pieces, adapters and the adapter SDK for, you know, going and writing adapters to other systems, and we ship a whole pile in the box. We have this BizTalk RFID component, which allows us to feed into collect and feed into the BizTalk engine, you know, reads and reads from RFID devices and create whole applications that really understand, you know, the edge, the physical world, right? You know, this car moved through this, you know, this gateway, right? I have a read through that. You know, a lot of the transportation systems now for bridges, right? That's all RFID, right? They have these sensors on the thing, and your car passes through, and so you can collect those reads and feed it into this engine, right? You don't have to build anything; it's all there in the box. Trading partner management, if you have a lot of trading partners to connect to, blah 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 blah, right? On it goes. A whole pile of capabilities that are specific to integration, right? Around this core engine, all plumbed in, all sort of out of the box, ready to go. A lot of this is stuff that many people try and write themselves, right? So my big message to you is, if you have any need to do any of this stuff, take a look at BizTalk. You don't need to be writing this stuff. It's complicated, takes a lot of time. It's usually very brittle when you at the end of the day. Right, so here's our demo scenario that John's going to spend the rest, really, of this session talking us through, so you can actually see this in action as much as we can sort of visualize it. So the scenario is a very simple one. It is admittedly simple, right? And you know, the scenario that we build has got all the sort of right pieces in there. You just would scale up the complexity of those pieces. So here it is. So a request, it's the classic sort of purchase order, you know, approval process to go and buy things. But we've automated the back end of this, as I'll show you. So we start off in SharePoint, though, right? We want to connect these two worlds together. You know, classic, I want to go and buy a whole pile of things. My manager has to go and approve it. This all happens in SharePoint. And then BizTalk Server handles a lot of the interaction with all the other systems that are part of this chain. Right? One of the first systems is the catalog. Right? The things that I am going to request to buy, well, where does the list of those things come from? Right? In our case, we actually mocked up, or using the HIS simulator to simulate getting that catalog from a third party, from vendor systems, who allow us sort of a direct connection to that thing, and then BizTalk feeds that back to SharePoint, which is where the SharePoint, you know, forms and process feed across that data. The next part is we also feed it to an ERP system and out to the vendors, right? So out to a vendor, two vendors in this case, depending on where I'm buying from. Right? Both those vendors are using different ways that they're allowing me to connect to them. In the first case, they're using FTPS as a sort of Dropbox location, and their system picks that up and deals with it, and the same in the reverse. When they want to send us something, they drop it in an FTPS location, and we pick that up, BizTalk picks that up. And the other case, they're just using a web service, so we can sort of talk to that thing, you know, through the web service stack. Pretty much the same example that I showed you in the previous slides. And then, of course, the second piece of this is that reporting piece, right? The process reporting. What's going on in the process? And so BizTalk has this capability called BAM, Business Activity Monitoring. That's the thing that surfaces all the process data. And then we've built a SharePoint app essentially on top of that, a Silverlight app on top of that. John,
Okay.
you want to walk us through it? I'll just flip the magic switch.
Great. So the scenario, imagine we're trying to automate a manual process. Really common one, as Tony said. You want to be able to request to buy an item, as an employee in a company. You want to get that request into the system. But somebody's got to approve that, to create a purchase order. Then you're going to send that out to the vendor, and then ultimately they're going to ship you the goods and they're going to invoice you for them. So what we've got here is a portal built in SharePoint 2010, using some of the capabilities of SharePoint 2010 and some of the capabilities of BizTalk to really integrate these two things together so we can create a slick, automated solution for this common business problem. How do I take this extensively manual process and automate it? So what I can do in this portal is I can see everything going on inside BizTalk and everything going on between my company and the external companies that I'm dealing with when I'm exchanging these purchase orders and these invoices. As Tony said, I want to pull those in maybe through FTP, or maybe I want to expose a web service endpoint for other guys to come in and call me and do the interaction that way. Because BizTalk gives you this rich way of being able to connect to lots of different things in different ways that suit your customers more easily. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to the left-hand side here and click on this new purchase request. So I'm a guy sitting there, and I want to order something. So I'm going to open up this page, and you sort of see this nice Silverlight animated experience. If it's a little bit jerky, it's because we're remoted into a machine that's over in Redmond, and that's hosting a VM which we're connected into through RDP. So it's a little bit slower than we'd like. But essentially, I've got this process. I have to say who I am. I'm logged on as Dan Park, and I can pick, when I want to request this item, and then begin. So it's going to load up this product catalog which I've got stored. That product catalog is going to let me pick from a list of things that maybe I want to order. Okay, whoops. So let's have a look and see what we've got. I can see, well, I've got a Zune 80 gig digital media player. So let's go ahead and order 2 of those. And I can add this to sort of my basket concept, and it appears over on the right-hand side here. And maybe I want to go and have a look at something else. Have a look at this nice keyboard. Maybe I'll have one of those as well. I'm going to add that to my order. And when I'm done with that, I can click Next. And I want to get my request into the system. So let's just put some notes on this thing. I'm really looking forward to this. If I can type. Forward to this. Please approve.
And those items that you're seeing that you were seeing in the thing, those are coming from that sort of external catalog. So BizTalk's sucking those items from an external third party, saying, "Okay, give me your catalog," pushing those to SharePoint, and then this little Silverlight appy guy is just picking those up directly from SharePoint.
So when I'm done putting in some comments, I can submit my purchase request. Hopefully this will come back, and you can see some cogs spinning here. And hopefully in a few seconds it'll come back and tell me that my request's gone in. Yep. And I can go back to my home page, my dashboard, and let's have a look and see what's going on. Well, okay, so now imagine I'm in the purchasing department and I can see the purchase request in a list in SharePoint, which I can now go and examine and maybe approve or reject. So I can see, Dan Park's put in this purchase request, so let's just open this up. And we go and see, yeah, Dan, okay, I know Dan. See what he's ordered. Down at the bottom here, yep, he's ordered a couple of items. That's fine. Notice this is opened up, you can't quite see this, opened up as an InfoPath form. So I'm just linking off in SharePoint to an InfoPath form showing this information. Okay. So let's have a look at the purchase approver tasks. I sit in the purchasing department. So I'm going to see these requests. And I see a list of everything that's pending, everything that's waiting to be approved. You see the status over the right-hand side. This outcome is currently blank because I need to do something with it. So I go and click on this item. It's going to pull up a dialog, which again shows me that information, this time not in InfoPath, but directly inside SharePoint. And I can see the summary, and I can say, I can approve or I can reject this purchase request. So let's just put a comment in there. Fine by me. I'll just approve that. And what this is going to do is it's going to kick off a workflow that's defined inside SharePoint. And that workflow process is going to go through the mechanism of doing the approval so that it can move on to the next stage. And the next stage is going to be that I've now got a purchase request approved and I want to create a purchase order. So let's just quickly flip back to the dashboard. So I'm going to create a purchase order which I need to send to the vendor. So let's have a look. You can see over on the right-hand side here, I've got some SharePoint, some Silverlight visualization there. And this is all data that's being stored in BAM. So, you know, the great thing about BizTalk is this idea of process visualization. You know, as Tony said, it's a server application. It can be hard to see what's going on. So BAM gives you this infrastructure which spans not just BizTalk servers, but other servers in your ecosystem. And it allows you to sort of aggregate up events and drill down into information inside them so you can see what's going on. And what we're doing here is we've got some SharePoint web parts which actually pull data out of the BAM database and make it easy to visualize.
And one of the things that I didn't mention earlier that is super easy to do, in the diagram we saw how BizTalk is connected to SharePoint. Well, how does BizTalk do that, right? Well, exactly the same way it connects to anything else. You just plug in an adapter. There's an adapter for SharePoint, right? You just point it at the SharePoint server and a document library if that's the thing that you want to monitor. And then BizTalk is just, you know, hitting that list and looking for changes, and you can operate over that. And so it can reach inside SharePoint and just suck those things out or push things back into SharePoint. And we just, you know, hook those two things together, and we write our process, you know, in BizTalk on the back end. But in this particular case, some of the process is also implemented in SharePoint as well, some of that, you know, that approval workflow. So, you know, you can flip-flop between those two, but it's super easy to connect these two things together.
Yeah, one of the foundational technologies that's new in SharePoint 2010, which is a sort of extension or enhancement of what was there in MOS 2007, is this thing called the Business Connectivity Services as well. Makes it very easy to connect out and pull data in from a variety of data sources. Right. So you can create these composite applications in SharePoint, oftentimes without even having to create any code. So while we've been talking, things have moved on a little bit. So it's created my purchase order for my purchase request, and that thing's been sent out. So now I see in my dashboard underneath purchase orders, I can see that this purchase order is being created. And over on the this web part, which is sort of slowly spinning around in Silverlight, I see that I'm now waiting for an invoice to be received. Actually, this already happened. Excuse me. So I've sent out a purchase order, and now I've received the goods, and I've been invoiced for those goods. So the purchase order's here. I can go ahead and have a look at that purchase order. Again, opens up a form. Here's the PO that I sent out. You know, 3000 Microsoft Way, Washington State. And I can have a look at the invoice that I've received for that purchase order. So let's have a look at that.
We're sort of ignoring the fact that they've actually got to ship this to us, and we've got to receive that shipment and acknowledge that we got it and all of that part of the process. So normally you'd have that. We're just, you know, speeded up that by, here's a purchase order, you know, send me an invoice, then I'll pay you. And the other piece of this scenario that we haven't implemented yet, in question mark, is you know, you could implement the back-end payment automation as well, right? So send me an invoice. That's sort of where we stop. But you could also then say, okay, now I'm going to send the money, right, through the payment infrastructure, right? We have connectivity. BizTalk has connectivity into the banking infrastructure, right? So you can send payments electronically too. We'll take questions at the end. We'll just get through it. Okay, thanks.
So yeah, so we've created the purchase order, send that out, receive the invoice, and you can see that we paid that. So one of these visualizations is showing the amount of money that we paid to settle that invoice. So I can go over to the side here. Let's just scroll up a little bit on the launch bar here and have a look at purchasing report. So let's see all of the orders, all the requests that I've received. You can see it's not very exciting yet because I've just got one, right? I've just got the Dan Parks just requested a keyboard and a couple of Zunes. And I can got these tabs on the right-hand side, again, using a nice Silverlight experience, and I can see things like the shipping cost breakdown, because maybe I've got some rules depending on who I'm ordering these goods from, depends on maybe what the shipping charges are. You know, I can set that up inside BizTalk using something called the business rules engine, which lets me configure without having to write code and without having to change the application every single time I change the rules, what charges I get charged with for shipping. So it makes it very easy to externalize things that are going to change outside of my application and change them as necessary. So Maybe what we'll do now is we'll push through a few more purchase requests. So down the bottom here, I've got this little tool, and you'll start to see things going on in a bit more rapid fire and see some of these graphs come alive. So I've got a little tool here, submission tool, which lets me just push in a whole bunch of requests over a short period of time. So I can set the number of messages I'm going to push in. So let's push in 10 requests. I'm just going to click start on this thing, and it's going to whir away and push all of these requests into BizTalk for me. See, it's spinning around, it's done. Let's go back to the dashboard here and see what's going on as this thing updates. You can see this little console down the right-hand side. This is sort of showing me events that I'm surfacing up again through another web part, so I can see things happening, see things going on. I can see I've received a purchase order, I'm submitting an invoice, all this good stuff happening. You can also see I've got some KPIs, so key performance indicators in SharePoint showing me the status of these things. Maybe some things have been rejected, maybe some things are in doubt, so they're on hold. But you can see this payment summary and this graphing is starting to get larger as I process more and more requests.
And the other thing that's sort of not so, we're showing a lot of, visualization in SharePoint. BizTalk's whirring away in the background for real, right, running all of this stuff. And of course, the other thing that's happening through a lot of the visualizations is we're also connecting this solution into the BI stack and infrastructure, right? When we're just piggybacking on top of, SQL and analysis services and all of that great infrastructure, that just feeds the data through the engine. So it's super, super simple. And while that's going through, you're probably all asking yourselves the question, I wish I could get a copy of that. Aren't you, right? No? Okay, maybe you don't want it. So our plan is we're going to put this whole sort of sample app up on the web, Microsoft.com/BizTalk. It should be there within the next month. We're just sort of doing some fit and finish polish on that. It will all be in the VM as well, so we'll be giving you the whole kit caboodle if you want to install that on physical machines, or you just want to download the VM and play with this puppy. It'll all be up there for you to enjoy and show customers and sell lots of BizTalk, or buy lots of BizTalk, or both. So you can see some of the summary information I've got here, the list of invoices, the list of purchase orders. I've got nice sort of paging on this, so I can say, well, remember I put in 10 plus the original one, so you can see, 1 to 5, 6 to 10, and then hopefully then an 11th one there. So in total, I've received, 10 of these things and created 10 purchase orders. So let's go back to the graph, the purchasing reports, and have a look at that. We start to see a breakdown. Whoops. Excuse me, I clicked on the wrong thing. We start to see a breakdown of who's ordering what. So this live chart, is exactly what it says it is. The thing about BAM is that I can push data into it across my business process, from SharePoint, from that workflow running behind the list, into BizTalk, the processing, the orchestration happening there, the communication with vendors. And I can see all of this in real time in SharePoint. That's why you see this thing just refreshing in the background almost. As I'm watching this thing, I can see messages flowing through the system, but I can see it in a way that I understand as a business user. I can see the rate of flow of things, the order processing rate of flow. I can see the time to fulfill these things. Maybe I want to measure my vendors based on how quickly they can fulfill my orders. Those kind of questions are the ones that BAM can answer for me. So, see my top spenders. I can see maybe I want to talk to them if they're ordering too much stuff. Let's have a look. I can see the ship methods that I'm using. Same-day express looks like it's popular. Two-day air. And I can also look at the process progress as well to see what's going on. And I see, I'm done. Every single one of those requests has been processed, the orders have been created, and the invoices have come in. So I've got a total of 11 of these things that are being fulfilled. Okay. So I think you get the idea of the app, and you're probably all dying to see how we actually built this thing, right? And the very first diagram I showed you around how BizTalk works and all the different pieces, what we're going to do is start taking a look through how to build this sort of app, right? And how we use the different parts of BAM and business rules and the orchestration engine of BizTalk to actually build a lot of the process of this app, how we hook up trading partners and adapters into this infrastructure. So, John, why don't you take us through how you build apps like this?
Yeah, okay. So the first point was where I created that purchase request inside SharePoint, which ended up going into a list for somebody to approve. So let's have a look at how that works. So for that, I can go into SharePoint Designer, which allows me to create Windows workflows and publish them into SharePoint and associate them with a list so that when I get that request created and it adds an item to that list, I can go ahead and run a workflow. I can do something. I can do the process that sits off the back of that list on every single item that gets added. So if I open the site up, let's just full screen this, open the site up, you can see I've got this workflows section under navigation over here. And you see I've got a list workflow, this purchase request approval workflow. So I can open that up inside SharePoint Designer. Very simple, but what it's doing is it's saying, you know, when it's received a new item, a new request, then I want to run this workflow. And you see what it's doing is it's logging to BAM for the current item. So this is we're going to write from SharePoint data into the business activity monitoring in BizTalk so I can track this thing in my portal. Then it's going to start this purchase request approval process. So what that's going to do is it's going to assign and probably alert as well that person who's received in the purchasing department. It's got to receive that request and authorize it, approve it. So maybe I'll see something in my inbox. You know, something I can configure in SharePoint. I've got an email. I've got a link I can click on, and it'll pull me up in SharePoint. I can view the contents of that request, and I can approve or reject it and add comments to that thing. Okay, so in this case, it's actually going to a group of approvers. So, you know, you don't want one person because they might be on holiday, so you set up a purchase approver group, and then everyone in the group receives the email, and I can just click through and do the thing. But it's all in SharePoint Designer. You know, I'm not having to use Visual Studio to create this thing. As a power user in SharePoint, I can create these workflows and have things kicking off and doing useful work. Okay, so the other thing that we'll look at is what's happening in BizTalk. So this orchestration work that's going on, the business process automation. So here, if I flip to Visual Studio now, which is the main development tool for BizTalk, I've got two orchestrations. I've got this process invoice and process PO. So if we look at the process PO one first and just go to the top of this thing, you can see, as Tony said right at the start, BizTalk's about getting data in and getting data out. And it's about integrating with whatever it takes to make that data flow in and out seamlessly with as little work as possible. Again, you know, I don't want to be writing too much code to do this in the traditional way. I might be writing thousands of lines of procedural code, which allows me to do this integration. It becomes very brittle, and we have to agree on data formats up front. And it's just hard to change over time. And ultimately, I'm going to add more vendors to my system. I'm going to want to change the rules of this thing, and I don't want to employ a whole team of developers just to maintain this thing. I want to make it very easy, and I want to externalize out the things that I know are going to change. So orchestration gives me a way of being able to visualize this business process. And I can see that over on the left-hand side, I've got these things called ports. Tony showed that on the BizTalk diagram. I've got ports on the left and the right-hand side. I receive data in, I process it in the middle, maybe have to map it from one format to another, and then do my process. And then on the right-hand side, I can connect to something else. I can send that data on and let somebody else process it and wait for a response. And that's exactly what I'm doing here. So the first thing I'm doing, I'm using this receive shape in the orchestration, and it's going to receive that new request. Then I'm going to do a vendor lookup. So I want to actually get some vendor details based on the request and the information, you know, those line items that I've added for the vendors that I'm ordering these goods from. And what that's actually doing is it's connecting out to a mainframe system. So using Host Integration Server, which is part of BizTalk Server now, I can actually connect out and maybe call a COBOL program sitting on a mainframe somewhere, an AS400 RPG system, and I can connect out to that and again integrate this thing into my BizTalk process.
And the other point about this picture is it's a picture, but it's the app too, right? You know, there's no, or maybe very little code in here. We draw pictures and connect lines together and all of that stuff. The picture, the sort of conceptual picture of my process is my app, right? BizTalk just runs this, you know, without it generating any code, right? This is the underlying, you know, this is the program that I'm writing by drawing pictures and lines. And as John said, the other interesting point here just to make is that at this point, at this level, we're not connecting my app to the sort of physical infrastructure, right? On the left, I've got this thing called a port. That's where I'm getting stuff in. It's really at the deployment time where I actually connect the physical lines of these pieces together, right? This particular, you know, folder in this particular location where I'm going to, you know, wait for files to come in, or this particular web service endpoint. All the configuration around, you know, what and who and when and how I talk to those people, are separated from the sort of the description of my app, right? And you really want that separation so you can change those things independently.
Yeah, so okay, so I've received that request and I'm going to send it out to a vendor lookup, and then here I've got a map. So this is a way that I can take a message and I can map it, again doing it graphically. So let's open that up. And I have this mechanism of being able to map data from one side to the other. So I can take any message format and map it to any other message format to get things in the right shape. And the maps are reusable artifacts. So once I've created one of these maps, I can use it across different projects, different solutions. You know, common scenarios using EDI, where I want to take EDI messages in, you know, Edifact, and I want to map those to some kind of canonical format, because that allows me to connect to lots of different backend systems inside my organization in the same way, using a canonical format, rather than having point-to-point mapping and these kind of problems that I get with traditional methods of development, where again it just makes things hard to change. You know, I add another system in and I need to do all the mapping to that new system. With BizTalk, that information is centralized. I only have to do that once. I put in the effort to create that map, and it's good for connecting anything now to that backend system that I've enabled through BizTalk. Okay, so let's keep going down. So after I've done that mapping, I'm going to call the rules engine. So this is the business rules engine. I've got a rules composer which actually lets me look at the rules and edit them and create new rules. And what this is going to do is work out what the shipping is for the items that I'm ordering. So this tool here, this business rules composer, if I open this up, you can see I've got a couple of things called policies. Now policies are a grouping of rules. So a grouping of declarative statements that let me control the logic of my application. But, you know, interestingly, this isn't, you know, written in C# and something I have to compile up and put in the GAC and something that's hard to change and test over time. This is something I can do using a specialist tool for it. So let's have a look at the calculate shipping policy. And if I open up the rules in this, you can see I've got ground, next day air, same day express, 2-day air. And I can see what controls, you know, who gets what level of shipping. So let's have a look and say, well, okay, if the ship request is equal to ground, then I'm going to apply these actions. So I'm going to work out the shipping cost and say, well, look, you know, the shipping cost when I say ground is the base cost for the ground shipping times the number of items in the order. If I want to know what the base cost of the ground shipping is, I can do this go to vocabulary thing, and it's kind of probably hard to see at the back. But you can see this is, I've just got a value set here, $5.95. So I'll pay that per item, and it'll just create this aggregated up. And this is the information that gets added to my order. So I'm actually creating the shipping totals through the rules engine. Again, you know, the power of this is I can edit these and publish a new version. You can see I've got different versions of the rules. I've got 1 and 1.3 here. And I can publish a new version of this thing without having to redeploy my entire application, just because some simple rules change. Okay, so going back to the orchestration, let's see what else happens. Now I'm going to actually create the purchase order down the bottom here. And the way I'm doing that is I'm using another one of these adapters, another way of connecting to a back-end system, and this time it's SQL Server. So I'm going to take the purchase request I've received, I'm going to map it, I'm going to do some rules, engine logic on this thing to work out what the shipping is, and I'm going to create a purchase order and put that in SQL. You know, then I can have maybe another process listening off the back of SQL when new rows are added to tables essentially inside my database. I can trigger processes off the back of that and, you know, implement those in BizTalk as well. So I'm going to do this send message out to SQL, and I'll get a response back from the insert. You know, maybe if there's an error, I can catch that and deal with that in my orchestration. Okay, and then finally down the bottom here, I've got to do a vendor assignment, and I'm going to send this out to the vendor. So I'm going to send them my purchase order. Okay, so that whole process you saw in SharePoint kicked off from a SharePoint list with a workflow on it. Is communicated with BizTalk and passes information from SharePoint to BizTalk through a list. The other thing BizTalk ships with is a SharePoint adapter, so that when new items get added to that list, when I create that request, it triggers an action in BizTalk. BizTalk's watching that list. New item gets added. You know, I can put views on the list as well if I want to constrain what I pick up. BizTalk's going to pick that up and run this orchestration. It's going to communicate, do the vendor lookups through my backend mainframe system. It's going to create the shipping amount and send the purchase order to the vendor.
In this scenario, we're obviously talking to two main vendors to send them purchase orders and shipping. John, what do we have in BizTalk that does sort of management of vendors? Because if I have 1,000 people I communicate with, that probably is going to get pretty complicated pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. So say I've got the problem where, yeah, exactly that. I've got 1,000 vendors. So you can see the way I build these orchestrations in BizTalk is I've got a send and receive shape, and I connect these to these ports, and the ports decide, you know, who it goes to. So if I had 1,000 vendors, I don't want 1,000 send and receive shapes in an orchestration, right? Because this thing's going to get enormous. I'll have lots of conditional logic that sits in there. And you know, how can I manage each one of these vendor relationships, again, outside of my application? And the answer to that is something called trading partner management. So inside the BizTalk admin console, I have a way of being able to create parties. And parties give me the mechanism to be able to create that logical to physical separation in my orchestration and say, you know what, I'm going to work out who to send this vendor to at runtime dynamically. And I'm going to bind that logical characteristic to the physical one. You know, this is the vendor name, and therefore that needs to go to this endpoint. Maybe I'm going to send it over FTP. Maybe I'm going to call a web service and send them that data. But I do all of that in the administration console, because that's an IT pro's job. You know, the person who looks after this BizTalk environment is going to get a new request to set up a new vendor. And they don't have to go into Visual Studio to do this. They don't have to write any code. They just go into the admin console here. And you can see that underneath this parties node, I've got a couple of vendors. I've got Fabricam and Litware set up. So I can decide which one of these vendors to send the request to. And I can add new ones. And I can set the conditions, the properties and the messages that I'm creating and building and receiving in BizTalk, and decide who to send this thing to. You know, very easy administration mechanism when I'm dealing with thousands of parties. And I do the same thing on the receive side as well. So I have a single logical port in BizTalk, and then the runtime works out who to actually send that to through this trading partner management mechanism.
Fabulous. So we're going to just leave a little bit of time for questions. We're almost out of time. We pretty much showed you a lot of those pieces in that very first diagram that I showed you. We showed you a lot of things in BizTalk, and through this demo you've actually seen, some of them you've seen just working, some of them as we've gone sort of delved behind the covers, you've actually seen how we build those things. And just flip back to the, oh, did I do the wrong one? I think it's 3. You know, we've actually seen how you actually build these applications as well. So I hope you got a sense, if you are brand new to this world, what BizTalk is and what it can do. In this simple scenario, we've sort of exercised a lot of the pieces, but this thing scales, you know, massively up, right? A lot of the things that we've just showed you, even the last thing that we just showed you around TPM, well, we had just 2 in there. But, handling 2 yourself, building a bit of code to handle 2 is probably what you would do. But, you know, as I said, if you got 10, 50, 100, you have to manage all of those things, and you have to manage the separation between the design time world, the developers world, and the IT pros world, and manage the configuration of those. You've got to keep those 2 pieces separate. So please, thanks for your time for listening. We'll take some questions now. There's mics around. Please fill out a session evaluation. Very important so that we know how we did, and you can give us feedback through that process. And then we'll open it up for questions.
Just one thing before you all run off. If you're interested in BizTalk and you don't, it's not something you've used before, with another hat that I wear, I actually work for Pluralsight Training. They're out there in the exhibition hall, and they'd love to give you one of these. I've got a few up the front, which is an on-demand, so you can watch
free
Pluralsight training videos for a week. BizTalk's one of them. SharePoint's another one. If you want to understand how to connect SharePoint through to BizTalk BAM data, then there's
I'll put these down here if you want to take one.
Feel free to come and grab one and try it out.
Any questions? Or come up and see us for questions.
Most of the time, you already have some kind of structured infrastructure.
Like what? Like you built yourself?
Like you built yourself.
Right.